Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I am, as always, your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by Mr. Marius Root. Marius, how's it cracking?
Not bad, and you, Nick? It's quite warm out here on the East End.
Oh, yeah. No, the room I'm sitting in, as I said yesterday, is sweltering, is the right word. But that's also due to the fact this is a terrible room. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And of course, we are also joined by Mr. Gabriel Krause. Gabriel, how are you, sir?
Good, ja. Schwätz. The Schwätz.
Schwätz indeed, sir. So let us move away from South Africa for a moment to talk about one of the world's biggest tech companies, and a company that I think is at least partially responsible for creating this sort of social media revolution that has changed the world over the last 10 years. And that is Facebook. Once upon a time, in fact, I think still in many ways, it is one of the largest of all of the social media companies. Right now we're streaming on Facebook, and some of the people watching us are watching us on Facebook. But the company seems to be losing, I think, a little bit of its shine. It's been under heavy attack from a variety of different groups. Both the right and the left in the United States have attacked the company for what they say are unethical practices. It's been criticized for its actions in Myanmar and the fact that it didn't really deal too well with the fact that the Myanmar government was using its platform as part of a way to encourage violence against the Rohingya people. And now the latest news is that CEO Mark Zuckerberg and the company announced that they have, for the first time ever in the company's history, had fewer daily logins to the website than ever before, and that they have declining profits. So this is one of the ways they track, basically. They know every time someone logs into Facebook a day, and that's kind of a metric they use to determine how many people are actually using the thing. Mark Zuckerberg himself said that this was most likely due to the boom in the popularity of the competitor, which doesn't quite do the same thing, but it's much newer, and that's TikTok, which is very popular, especially amongst kids. And it shows very short videos that you can kind of watch back to back endlessly. Immediately in the aftermath of this, Meta, which is the new name of Facebook, Facebook's parent company rather, saw its stock plunge by 22.6% during after-hours trading. So, Gabriel, what do you make of this all? Do you think? I thought when I heard the story, the phrase that came to my mind was that no king rules forever. It does seem like Facebook is going to be having to get used to a different world now. What do you make of this story?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the competitor that, at least on the story that Facebook is telling, and it seems plausible, that's eating into its market share a little bit, is not doing exactly the same thing, and is not a politically based competitor. So since I was in university in America a decade ago, there were attempts since 2012. I remember serious attempts to establish new alternatives to Facebook that would provide the same service, but would not have the same kind of political outlook as the holding company, which does have some effect on the kinds of conversations and kinds of algorithm sharing spreads that happen. Donald Trump famously tried a similar thing more recently, and there have been various attempts in between, including from Google, Alphabet, which is another one of the world's biggest tech companies. They try to create Google Circles in their Google Plus program. None of those really worked. TikTok is seeming to do some work. So there's a lesson there about disruption is often, by its nature, not what you expect. The obvious story was always, okay, there'll be people who are irritated with Facebook and they'll defer. No, the people, when it happens, it's because people are chasing a new carrot, not running away from a stick. I think what the other thing that's interesting is, so Nicholas, you'll correct me, but the daily users or the active users is something like 1.9 billion on the Facebook platform, and the reduction in daily use was relatively small, something like 50 million users less per day or something like that. Whereas the stock price devaluation,
500,000. Yeah,
500,000,
500,000. So,
tiny relative to 1.96 billion active users. Whereas the stock price is coming down by 20%. So for people who care about valuing stocks, the first thing that most asset allocators will often ask is, what is the capital to income ratio? I like to ask this about governments and countries. There it's very unusual. I'm basically the only South African who asks that question. But with companies, it's very normal. And the Facebook capital to income ratio is basically how valuable is the company versus how much income is it generating. And for the first half of its existence, that ratio was infinite because Facebook was worth $30 billion when it was still earning negative money. And why was it worth so much? Well, because people guessed, and they guessed correctly, that Facebook would first have a free service with no advertising that would create a huge network. And then it would have a de facto monopoly on that network and would be able to commodify it. And that when it did, it would be able to make lots and lots of money. That's exactly what happened. Facebook became the biggest advertising company in the world. And the capital to income ratio came down to the sort of 60s to 1, 50s to 1. That's still extremely high. If you look at an oil company, their capital to income ratio is usually 12 to 1. So whatever their income is in a year, you multiply that by 12, that's what the market values them at. Standard companies, 20 to 1. So, it'll double its value through income every generation. Whereas Facebook was like 50, 60, 70 to 1. It's generally higher for tech companies. And that's because the network effect guess is always that they've created this huge network. They haven't fully figured out how to turn it into money. Here's the problem. That assumes it's going to keep growing as a network. So the issue is not the people that they've lost. The issue is the turnaround in the trend. And if Facebook doesn't manage to turn that trend around again shortly, I think that its stock valuation is going to continue to be under immense pressure and might find itself settling down at a more traditional, even for tech company, CPI, capital income ratio. And so that's not going to be good news for people holding Facebook stock, but it'll be exciting, I suppose, for its competitors who aren't facing the same challenges right now. And I think part of that is because of the political issues that you started with. Thank you, Nick.
So, Morris, just want your thoughts on this, but also I've been quite interested in how I think one of the ways that Facebook was really able to maintain for quite a while, despite the fact that a lot of younger people went on to different platforms, is that older people really did embrace the thing. And in fact, it's now become sort of a meme amongst younger people that Facebook is for old people. In fact, I know quite a few people who are a bit younger than me who actually don't have a Facebook account and probably never will open one. Now they have, something like Instagram, which I think owned by Facebook. But it's interesting how I think it really became embraced by older people. And so it's now been, some people have jokingly called it the boomer social media platform. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think that's right. It does seem younger people are more likely to use Instagram and even TikTok, especially if you're in your early 20s and your teens. But TikTok seems to be maybe even more toxic than Facebook. I don't know how true this is, but I believe it's got spyware and malware for the Chinese government on TikTok. And there also seems to be I've been reading some, they're very preliminary, but TikTok seems to be affecting young people's mental health by people diagnosing themselves on TikTok with these little videos, 20-second videos, and saying that there's this thing wrong with them, and people watching and decide, yes, that's also wrong with them, and kind of validating people who claim to be ill instead of actually going to go seek professional help. But I mean, they've also been, this is one of those moral panic things. People are probably having moral panics about the printing press when Johann Gutenberg invented it in 1500 or whatever the case is. Every time a new technology or a new way of doing things, there will be people who complain about it. But I think it's one of these things. Facebook seems like a juggernaut now, but like with anything, nothing is ever too big to fail, and it's not impossible that in a decade or 20 years time, Facebook will have gone the way of MySpace, and MySpace will be kind of a meme. where like if you're really behind the times, you say, go check out my MySpace, so maybe it'll be the same with Facebook. But I think Facebook's also a good example of how, technology and the internet and social media has really changed things. I remember reading something a little while ago, which is one of those little pithy statements, but I think it's quite telling, that the biggest content provider in the world is Facebook, even though it doesn't provide any of its own content. The biggest taxi company in the world is Uber, even though it doesn't own one single vehicle. The biggest supplier of hotel rooms, or whatever you want to call it, even though it doesn't own one building, is Airbnb. And I think it's they've been quite big disruptors in the way that people do business and so on. And so I think even if Facebook doesn't if it somehow doesn't survive in its current form, I think its legacy has been quite big, and it's changed a lot of the way we do things. But even just, as you said earlier, social media is so important now for a lot of companies, even as some, from the Daily Friend and Institute of Race Relations, having, punting your stuff on social media is so important to get your message out there. And, and I think we probably wouldn't have the reach and the voice we did without things like Twitter and Facebook. And I know that the Daily Friend's thinking of starting a TikTok account, but it's only if you, Nick, promise to do a dance every Friday and tell people what's happening that week on the Daily Friend show. So
I don't know. I don't know if this is a very good idea. In fact,
Daily
I think
Friend
it's
dance.
possibly the worst idea I've ever heard in my entire life. But that aside, so Gabriel, just any thoughts on that? Because I know you tend to be quite skeptical of some of the criticism of social media as like sort of negative effects, or at least you generally often have a pushback of a kind. So I want your thoughts on that, but also the geopolitics of this. According to the story that Facebook is telling, we have a Chinese company disrupting the profitability of an American company. What do you make?
Yeah, that's hilarious. Facebook is always an international sort of cosmopolitan company when it suits it, and then it's an American company when it suits it. Just a quick caveat on what I said earlier about those price to earnings ratios or capital income ratios for a company. It's even lower than I was saying for Facebook already. It's already actually coming down to about 20, just above in the low 20s to 1. So the market is really quite gloomy on Facebook. And so what is there to say about the social effects of social media? I think the headlines story that I like to tell is the Gutenberg Press one that Marius alluded to. There was 100 years of war that basically came after the printing press. The 30 Years' War was the main one in there, but there are various other ones. And it kind of only starts to bed down with the Glorious Revolution of 1688, 1689 in the UK, where a kind of rule of law system is robustly secured. The Netherlands, of course, also doing pretty well in that. So I think the similar thing is happening today. And if you look at graphs of the cost of information to spread it versus the amount of information being spread, the fit is exactly the same pattern after the printing press versus after social media. The only difference is time moves, history moves 5 times faster now, 6 times faster now, something like that. So I think we're sort of getting through towards the end of the 100 years. I think this kind of plateau of Facebook is another bit of evidence for it. I think the main thing is that it, like with everything else, actually, it comes down to the user. People complain about guns, people complain about ideas, mathematics. There are people who killed each other about mathematics 2,500 years ago. They said, don't you dare tell me about the square root of 2 being impossible to express as a fraction. That's just, if you tell the kids that, they're going to lose their minds. And so some kids did lose their minds, and some people stabbed each other. Ideas are not the enemy. Tools are not the enemy. Human beings that are being stupid, that's a problem. So people who use Facebook stupidly are gonna shoot themselves in the foot. And people who use it responsibly can do really good work. I think we try to add to the sum of light in that regard. And I really value the people who support us in that regard. My final comment will be on this, that there was always this idea that government would, if Facebook got too big or too bad, would regulate it, split it, put it in, make it better, make Facebook great again. That's really where I have always had a very strong pushback. Publishers were not saved by government censors. That always made things worse. and the arguments for censors were always the same. If Facebook, I do expect though that Facebook's sort of patriotic, or we're being beat by the Chinese call is an attempt to protect itself from what is most likely to happen, which is that as the company really automatically gets weaker because of genuine competition, that's when it becomes easiest for government to climb in with anti-monopoly regulation, because they won't be hurting a popular company. They'll be hurting a company whose stock valuation is going down and whose users are starting to drift away from it. And there's nothing like a government sort of doing something that it seems to be doing that's not actually making a difference.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's a thing that sort of liberally minded people often tend to view from government, is that government is very slow. And it would not surprise me, considering that the US government has a disproportionately large number of very old people, that they may end up regulating, the pants off of Facebook, just as Facebook is no longer particularly important. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But anyway, let us move on to our next story. And this is one about the construction industry. So, I mean, we've touched a little bit on this, I think, in previous stories on the show. But on Tuesday this week, an armed group was arrested for attempting to take over the Durban High Court building site. So the Durban High Court has been, it's currently going through an 850 million rand renovation project, where the existing building is being sort of reconstructed, and additional buildings are built on the side to accommodate more courtrooms and staff. And apparently during the construction on Tuesday, a group of armed men claiming to be from a local business forum forced their way into the site, stopped work, and chased away all the contractors, basically with threats of violence. However, unlike many cases where this seems to have happened in South Africa before, the police did respond, and there was SAPS and what it called its tactical team responded and arrested 6 people. So hopefully there is follow through on that through the legal system, but still, the story goes much better than a lot of other law and order stories in South Africa. But I think it's quite interesting. This is certainly not the first time. Can we
pause there? The story where an armed mafia raids a court to try and muscle it into like extortion money. That's an unusually good story in South Africa.
Because they got arrested, yes.
Someone got arrested. No one's been prosecuted. No one's been found guilty. But just the fact that someone's been arrested already makes it extremely good news.
It's an amazing, it's basically our version of the Untouchables. Like, these brave guys standing up against the forces of darkness and criminality. They'll, what's this guy's, it's the KwaZulu-Natal version of Elliot Ness down there.
No, you're right. I am setting the bar rather low here, but still, I do think there is good to be found in here. Maybe I'm just being overly optimistic. Marius, your thoughts on this? You had a great quote from a friend of yours that you told me before the show.
Yeah, so it wasn't a friend of mine. It was a construction company. I can't remember who. I think it might have been Marian Roberts. But don't hold me to that. But they said, because this kind of thing goes back many years. It's not new. It's, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, it's been an issue where there'll be there'll be construction and they'll be building whatever, and then local, basically mafia come in and muscle in and say, cool, you guys have to give us 10% of the profits, or you have to hire 50 of our guys, or whatever the case is. Otherwise, we're not going to let you. And they come come with the big trucks and AK-47s, and it's not safe at all. And as I said, this construction company, like I said, I think it was Marian Roberts, but I can't recall, said it was more dangerous to have a construction company in Baghdad than was in KwaZulu-Natal. So I think that's very telling. And I think also some of the stuff, more dangerous in KwaZulu-Natal than Baghdad. But I think this kind of stuff very common in KwaZulu-Natal. We've been seeing it up in Richards Bay as well, where we saw a mine manager at a mine in Richards Bay was killed about a year or 2 ago because he was pushing back against the criminality around the mine and in the mine and so on. So KwaZulu-Natal's got a big problem with, I think, this kind of thing. We all know that the July riots started in KwaZulu-Natal, and I think it's, probably, I don't want to, say with any certainty, but maybe with some collusion from the security forces and the police and so on. And I mean, it is a very low bar, but this is a good news story that we actually had the SAPS and other people come and push these guys away. But for every one of these stories, there's probably 10 that we don't hear about, and it's probably quite common. Probably a lot of guys, they either decide, let's just give these guys 10%, or more likely they say, stuff it, we're not going to take any jobs in KwaZulu-Natal, and maybe even, we're not going to take any jobs in South Africa. Just too much of a mission. You've got too many regulations put up with. Even without the regulations, you have these thugs who come here and threaten you. And, like I say, the mile manager up at Richards Bay, he was killed for his troubles. And he was innocent man just trying to do the right thing. And also he's probably one guy, there's probably maybe even hundreds of stories exactly like that. People get killed doing the right thing in the company and, within government, and they get killed by, bad hombres, and we don't hear about that. So, but yeah, it's not good for KwaZulu-Natal, not good for South Africa. It's something that needs to be cracked down on. But who knows if there's the political will to exist for it? And even if there was, would our security forces and the police be able to these days?
So, Gabriel, I think that the thing that really sticks out to me, and you already pointed this out, is just how sort of brazen this seems to be. And that to me suggests that the problem is really bad. But I also want to link this to what I really feel like is the growing problem of warlordism, and that's particularly in KZN, but I think it's across the whole country. And I think that there is a strong connection between this and, for example, xenophobic attacks, which often seem to be a similar kind of thing. I remember the story. So I assume in this particular instance, the business forum was probably going to demand that, quote unquote, local people be employed on the construction project, or local business owners be involved in the construction project. I remember the story that you told of an institution in rural KZN where there were some people who were very outraged that, quote unquote, foreigners from Pietermaritzburg had been employed.
It's also linked to, I think, the killing of councillors that you guys spoke about on the show a day or two ago. I think it's all linked to that as well.
So Gabriel, I just want your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, partly there's just the element of lawlessness, which is, Parliament being set on fire by some guy who's now sort of telling the court that he was like a fan of a whole bunch of white supremacists, best friend of Eugene Tablanche, the guy who was arrested for allegedly setting fire to Parliament. Is he crazy? Is this just the most obvious line to say that's going to make everyone go, you're crazy? I don't know. It's an interesting case. The hammerman in the Constitutional Court going after the windows, me getting thrown out of the union buildings. Our public, our big public buildings are clearly not super safe. But there is a special thing going on around that particular South KZN High Court. I remember Jacques Poe writing very grippingly about an assassination that took place of a state's witness on the steps of the court leading up to the trial. So the witness arrives, they're going into the court, and I don't think I'm wrong to say that the assassination vehicle, the vehicle from which the drive-by shooting took place, turned out to be owned by the SAPS, and that some of the accused were alleged to be within the SAPS, and that one of the investigating officers then turned out to have not just a criminal record, but a conviction against him, time not served. So really quite profoundly brazen subversion of law and order. And the inevitable consequence of this is a kind of creation of fiefdoms, and in that regard, it becomes the sort of government's patronage network rule, where it's all about loyalty, who gets a bit of cheese, and not really about value add. And that plays out truly across the country. And in terms of the construction business, it plays out across the country. I've been in cases in the East Rand, close to Marius, where building site managers were attacked for not hiring locals because they hired people that weren't with allegedly with the ANC local councillor. and in fact were even from the very same council area, but just weren't part of that little patronage network.
Right.
And I've seen cases like that in rural Limpopo and Northwest Province, where tenders for construction projects have been effectively decided at the barrel of a gun.
And
In
I just
terms
want to
of
add to that.
reform, yeah.
It's quite interesting is that actually a lot of this has been integrated into the way that the government at a municipal level does business. So, for example, when I was a ward councillor, there was the municipality hired what was called a community liaison officer, which is someone who, it can theoretically be anyone. A city official chooses them, but they're usually someone suggested by the councillor. And this person has to communicate with the community, negotiate with them, and also recruit workers from the local community to supplement whoever the contractors on the project are. Now, the particular area that I was in, it's a middle-class area, not really that many unemployed people were interested in that kind of work, although some people did go and get jobs from the area. But the fear of that kind of intimidation and of that danger to the project because of these patronage networks that want to get in, it's so pervasive that government has literally incorporated it into the structure of how they do projects.
It's official.
That kind of thing. Yes, it's official. We officially have basically some hookup connectors for the local patronage network to plug into.
Yeah, it's crazy, and that's where the reform is not going to be forthcoming. Even if you get an enthusiastic police commissioner, a Becky Clele that's less interested in sort of chasing around bikinis on the beach or foreigners selling knickknacks, and more keen on actually taking down violent and intimidating mafiosa. As long as the background conditions are incentivizing that kind of behavior, you're just going to be playing whack-a-mole. You're going to hit this one down, and 4 other ones are going to come up. And that's why you need to change the law. I wish we cared more about changing the law.
No, that's a very good point. We don't talk enough about legislation in this country, because I think because of the way that our parliament has been working for so long, is that people have just sort of discounted what legislation actually does. But you're right, it's really important. Right, so we don't really have time for final topics. So, Morris, any concluding thoughts on this? And then maybe I can briefly mention our final topic.
No, but I just think it's, another shows the breakdown in law and order in South Africa. And, if you want a country to have an economy that grows sustainably, one of the most important things is safety and, that your investment will be protected. And I don't think we have that in South Africa. And we can see, people, and, South Africa's already got a bad reputation. I saw there was a tweet the other day about somebody complaining about San Francisco. Somebody replied to him and said, "Hey, man, calm down. It's not Cairo or Johannesburg." And, Johannesburg's had this actually reputation for a while. But it's, I remember since the late 90s was seen as this, very dangerous place. But I think that's South Africa in general. People probably think of South Africa, think of, if they know anything about the country, if they have some knowledge of South Africa, they probably think of Nelson Mandela, animals, and Crown, most probably.
No, I think that's probably true. So I see there's an audience comment here that, Gabriel, I'll give you a chance to respond to. Sean says here that the SAPS needs to be disbanded and rebuilt from the ground up. People might object, but the reality is we do not have a police service. It's now a criminal network. Gabriel, do you agree with that assessment?
I think it's too radical. You've got to be careful of the medicine being worse. You can chemotherapy someone to definitely die. But some serious overhaul is needed. The Institute has long tried to draw attention to the idea of local sheriff elections. So, you would in South Africa call it a station commander. And I definitely know in parts of central Johannesburg, sort of Hillbrow, Doornfontein, Yeovil, that a lot of people would be very eager to have the capacity to vote. And that they believe, and there's good sort of background reasons to believe that in very diverse, very unruly countries like South Africa and America, this is a system that allows some hope for genuine reform. There are potential drawbacks of over-enthusiastic sheriffs that are particularly driven against a specific subsection, but it really does do good things. And if you accompany that with genuine reform laws about the patronage network, about the red tape, about the cater deployment stuff, then I think that you put South Africa on the right path. And in the meanwhile, the stopgap is not to disband the police and replace it. It's what's going on, which is for people to pay for private security or to arm themselves and train themselves and figure out how to defend themselves. That's not great, but that is what is happening, and that will continue to happen until there's proper reform.
All right, so that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for listening. Please like the video and subscribe to us if you enjoy our content. We really appreciate that. Please tell your friends about it. Share the video on social media. And also support the Institute of Race Relations. You can go to www.irr.org.za, click the Join Us button on the top right, it's a big red button, sign up to become a friend of the Institute who donates to us and keeps us going. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, and we hope that you have a most excellent day.